Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Brave Animals for more true stories of heroic dogs, shocking rescues, and emotional discoveries. Every week we share unbelievable moments where animals step in when humans fail. Your support keeps these stories alive and honors the loyalty of our furry heroes. At 10:32 a.m. on a regular Tuesday morning, in a quiet fourth-grade classroom in Cedar Valley Elementary, a German Shepherd K9 suddenly lunged toward the back corner of the room and started digging furiously at the floorboards. 30 seconds earlier, kids were laughing at a math joke. 30 seconds later, the entire school was on lockdown. His name was Titan. Officer Bradley had brought Titan in for a friendly K9 demonstration, something the school did every fall to build community awareness. The kids loved it. Titan was huge, with thick tan and black fur and amber eyes that somehow looked like they understood everything. He had calmly demonstrated how he could sit, track a toy, and obey commands in German. Everything had gone smoothly until the moment Titan froze in front of the old radiator. Then something changed. Without warning, he growled, a deep, primal sound that startled everyone. He pulled hard against the leash, sniffing the corner. Then, ignoring Officer Bradley's commands, he began to claw at the wooden floor like his life depended on it. The room fell silent. Catherine Miller, the teacher in room 207, tried to laugh it off. "He must smell a mouse," she said, but her voice cracked halfway through. Several kids near the back looked nervous, scooting their chairs away. One child, Joey Carter, raised his hand and asked quietly, "Is there something down there?" Officer Bradley, a seasoned handler with 12 years on the force, had never seen Titan behave this way during a public demo. His instinct told him this wasn't a drill. He knelt beside his dog, placed a hand on Titan's back and tried to redirect him. Titan wouldn't budge. He kept growling, tail stiff, ears up, his paws scratching at the base of the wall like he knew something no one else did. Bradley reached for his radio. "This is Officer Bradley. I need backup at Cedar Valley Elementary. Possible discovery, repeat possible discovery, secure room 207. The school principal was called. So was the local police department. Within 7 minutes, 2 patrol cars and a plainclothes detective arrived on the scene. The children were quickly evacuated to the cafeteria. Parents were notified there had been a potential threat detection, but no injuries. Room 207 was sealed off. Titan still hadn't moved. He was now sitting perfectly still, his eyes locked on a single spot between the floorboard and the wall heater. When Officer Daniels, the detective on duty, asked what had happened, Bradley simply pointed. "He won't leave that spot. And I trust him. Whatever's under there, it's not nothing." Daniels crouched, pressed his ear to the floor, then knocked gently on the wood. Hollow. That part of the classroom had once been a storage alcove before it was sealed during renovations, a decade ago. No one had thought much of it since. "Get the tools," Daniels ordered. As maintenance staff unscrewed the baseboards and gently lifted the floor planks, the smell hit them first. It wasn't strong, but it was wrong. A chemical scent. Old, dry, mixed with something sour, metallic. The kind of smell you don't forget after you've worked a few crime scenes. Titan stood up again and started whining low in his throat. Beneath the final board was a gap about 18 inches deep, wrapped in old insulation. Folded between the layers was a bundle, covered in plastic, wrapped in duct tape and tagged with red tape that had faded to pink over the years. Daniels stepped back. He put on gloves and carefully lifted the package. Inside were items no one expected to find in an elementary school. There was a sealed metal box. Inside the box, 2 tiny bones. Brittle and dark, a Polaroid photo of a terrified child, a roll of undeveloped film, a flash drive labeled 1975 Confidential. A note, written in what appeared to be a trembling hand, that read, "He told me no one would believe me." Daniels's face went pale. He immediately called in the forensic unit. "We have something big," he said into his phone, pacing the hallway. "This might go deep, real deep." The principal, Mr. Howard, arrived moments later. When he asked what was going on, Daniels showed him the note. The older man swayed slightly, then leaned against the wall. That handwriting looks like Mrs. Graves," She taught here in the 70s. She disappeared during spring break in 76. Was her case ever solved? Daniels asked. No, Mr. Howard whispered. They said she ran off with a boyfriend, but her car was found 2 towns over, doors locked, keys still in the ignition. As the forensic team documented the evidence, Titan remained nearby, eyes fixed on the hole in the floor. As if guarding it, as if saying, finally, it's out. Outside the building, news vans were already arriving. Rumors were spreading fast. A few teachers who had worked at the school for decades exchanged pale glances, their memories clearly spinning. In the break room, one custodian quietly said, I always thought something wasn't right with this place. The mayor was notified. The district attorney got involved. The school board held an emergency meeting that night. Back at the precinct, Daniels plugged in the flash drive. The files were password protected, but the metadata was visible. Date created, March 21st, 1975. Owner, R. Marks, Facilities Director. Daniels' heart skipped a beat. Robert Marks had been the head of school maintenance for over 25 years. He'd retired quietly in 1999. 3 days later, he was found dead in his home. Natural causes, heart failure. But what if he left behind secrets no one had dared to uncover? Back in Cedar Valley, Titan was hailed as a hero. But Officer Bradley knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. Not when a dog could smell what humans had ignored for nearly 50 years. Detective Daniels stared at the flash drive on his desk like it might detonate. The room was quiet, except for the soft whir of the evidence bag printer. No one had been able to crack the password yet, but the date on the file, March 21st, 1975, haunted him. Daniels leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. It had been hours since Titan had uncovered the strange package in room 207. And although the school had returned to a modified schedule, the classroom was now a crime scene, off limits to everyone except investigators. The press, already circling the district office like buzzards, had gotten wind of a disturbing discovery, but no one outside the task force knew the full scope yet. He looked up at Officer Bradley, who was sitting across from him with Titan at his feet. The dog hadn't rested. His ears twitched every few seconds like he was still alert to something. You think the flash drive is the key? Bradley asked. Daniels nodded. It has to be. The handwriting on the note, the items in the box, the date. Everything ties back to something someone buried on purpose, and now, thanks to your dog, it's coming undone. Titan lifted his head as if he understood. The door opened and forensics tech Maya entered, holding a clipboard and a small sealed bag. We ran a partial DNA test on the bone fragments, she said. They're human. Likely from a child between the ages of 8 and 10. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. She handed Daniels the report. He scanned it, then looked up sharply. They don't match anyone in the missing persons database? Not even close, Maya confirmed, which means either the child was never reported missing or the case was misclassified. Daniels felt his stomach twist. So now we have the remains of an unidentified child, a decades-old flash drive, a handwritten note from a woman who vanished in 1976, and a retired maintenance man with ties to it all. And the only reason we found it is because a K-9 went off script? During a school demo. He turned back to Bradley. How does Titan do it? That was 50 years of dust, insulation, and sealed wood. Bradley smiled faintly, patting Titan. Dogs remember what we choose to forget. He's trained to detect the scent of trauma, human decay, chemicals, anything that shouldn't be there. Sometimes he reacts to things even I can't explain. Daniels looked back down at the note from the evidence box. He told me no one would believe me. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone in the district office might know more than they were saying. Later that afternoon, Daniels visited the local library and pulled archived yearbooks from Cedar Valley Elementary. He flipped through pages, yellowed with age, looking for anything connected to the names on the file metadata. One yearbook from 1975 caught his eye. In the faculty section, 3 names stood out: Mrs. Judith Graves, Mr. Lennox Hayes, and Mr. Robert Marks. All 3 were employed the year the note was dated. Judith Graves, the young literature teacher, disappeared during spring break. Her case was never solved. Robert Marks was the head custodian who retired quietly in the late 90s. And Lennox Hayes, he was still alive and still living in Cedar Valley. The next day, Daniels and a young officer named Reed knocked on the door of a small, weathered house tucked behind a shuttered hardware store. A middle-aged woman answered. "We're looking for Mr. Hayes," Daniels said. The woman frowned. "That's my father. He doesn't get many visitors. What's this about?" "Just some questions about Cedar Valley Elementary. It's part of an ongoing investigation." She nodded and led them inside. The living room was dark, the shades drawn. In a recliner sat a frail man, maybe in his early 80s, with white hair and deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were foggy but alert. "Mr. Hayes, I'm Detective Daniels. We're reopening a case from 1975. We need to ask you about Judith Graves and Robert Marks." The old man blinked slowly. "Judith," he said. "Pretty girl. Heart like glass. Shouldn't have been working in that place." "What do you mean?" Hayes took a long breath. "There was something under the school, not just the floor, below the boiler room. Old blueprints show storage tunnels from the 60s. They were sealed, but not well. Robert knew them better than anyone." Daniels exchanged a glance with Reed. "Did Robert ever mention anything unusual?" Hayes laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "He kept things quiet, but he told me once that he found something down there, something he wasn't supposed to see." Daniels leaned forward. "Did he ever say what it was?" "No," Hayes replied. "Just that he wasn't the only one who knew. Said Judith figured it out, tried to report it. Then she was gone." The room went silent. Daniels stood. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. If you remember anything else, please call us." Outside, Reed asked, "You think the tunnels are still there?" "If they are," Daniels replied, "they're not on the updated blueprints, which means someone made sure people forgot." Back at the school, Titan walked beside Officer Bradley through the back hallway. The building was quiet. Students had been sent home early, and most teachers were gone for the day. Titan stopped at a janitor's closet near the old boiler room. His nose pressed to the floor again. Bradley crouched beside him. "You smell something, boy?" Titan scratched once, then twice. His tail stiffened. Bradley radioed Daniels. "He's found another spot. We're in the west wing, near the basement access." Daniels arrived 15 minutes later with 2 officers and a building supervisor. They opened the floor grate near the boiler. A rusted ladder led into darkness. At the bottom, they found a narrow tunnel sealed with drywall and plywood. Someone had tried to cover it years ago. A few careful strikes with a crowbar opened a small hole. The air that drifted out was stale and familiar. It carried the same metallic tang they had smelled in room 207. Daniels turned on his flashlight and ducked inside. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, the walls covered in old insulation. About 20 feet in, they found it. A metal door. It had no knob, just a sliding latch. When they pried it open, they stepped into a room no one had entered in decades. Inside were broken chairs, a burned notebook, and another box. This one had a name scratched into it. Judith Graves, Daniels whispered. This was never a school secret. It was a town secret. Titan whined behind him, and the walls held their breath. The room behind the metal door was still, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like time itself had stopped moving. The flashlight beams from Detective Daniels and Officer Bradley cut through the heavy dust, revealing walls lined with insulation and scorched tiles. Someone had tried to burn something inside. The scent of old smoke still lingered, faint but sharp. Titan stepped in behind them, his nose close to the floor, sniffing slowly and deliberately. He didn't bark this time. He simply walked forward and sat next to a blackened box on the far side of the room. Daniels approached carefully. The box was wooden, the lid cracked slightly open. On the top was a name etched roughly into the wood. Judith Graves. Beneath it, in faded red marker, the words "Do not open" were barely visible. Bradley looked over Daniels' shoulder. Do we wait for forensics? Daniels hesitated for just a second. No, this is the second box tied to her name. We can't waste time. He pulled on gloves and gently lifted the lid. Inside were 3 items: a leather-bound diary, a broken classroom nameplate that read, Miss Graves, and a cassette tape in a plastic case labeled March 12th, Counseling Office. Daniels exhaled, slowly. She recorded something. Bradley looked around the room. There's no player down here. We'll need to get this back to the lab. Daniels placed the items in a sealed evidence bag and turned to Titan. The dog hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on a specific patch of the floor behind them. Titan, Bradley called. The shepherd didn't respond. Instead, he began to whimper, ears back, tail stiff. Daniels followed his gaze and saw it, a square panel of floor tiles that didn't match the others. The corners were newer, less dusty. Bradley pulled out a utility knife and carefully pried one tile loose, then another. Beneath them was a thin sheet of plywood nailed into a wooden frame. Daniels grabbed the edge and lifted. What they saw made both men recoil. A second compartment, lined in concrete. Inside was a folded blanket, half-rotted, stained dark in patches. A child's shoe. And next to it, a doll with melted plastic features. Daniels dropped the board and stood back, his heart pounding. Another one, a different hiding place. Bradley turned to him. What the hell happened in this room? No one answered, because the truth was buried deeper than either of them had expected. That night, the lab technician managed to play the cassette. It started with static, then the soft click of a recorder, then a voice. Female, young, tired. This is Judith Graves. I don't know who will hear this, but I can't keep quiet anymore. There was a pause, followed by the sound of a door creaking in the background. If something happens to me, it's not an accident. I've seen things. I've heard things through the floorboards of room 207, children crying, then nothing. The voice cracked. I told Principal Bennett. He said I was imagining it. But Robert Marks believes me. He said there's a space below, the boiler room that was never supposed to be accessed. But someone's been using it. Another pause. This one longer. I think they've hurt someone. Maybe more than one. I'm leaving this in the counseling office in case I disappear. Then a click. Silence. Daniel sat in the dark listening room, his jaw clenched. Judith had tried to warn someone, and no one had listened. The next morning, Daniels met with the school district archivist. A woman in her 60s named Donna. She had worked with Cedar Valley for over 30 years and remembered the old staff like family. When Daniels played the tape for her, she pressed a tissue to her mouth and whispered, "Oh God, she was telling the truth. All these years." Do you remember anyone else connected to Judith? Anyone who might have tried to protect her? Donna hesitated. Robert Marks. He always kept an eye on her. But after she vanished, he stopped talking to people. Spent his time in the tunnels. Said they were speaking to him. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Speaking? He didn't mean it literally. He said things didn't add up. Things moved. Locks changed without warning. He believed someone still had access. Daniels asked, "Do you have blueprints of the old school?" Donna nodded and pulled out a rolled map from a metal tube. She spread it on the table. "There," she said, pointing to the boiler room. "This tunnel. It used to connect to an old records room. That room was sealed after a small fire in 1973. Daniels traced the line and froze. The sealed records room ran directly beneath room 207. That same afternoon, Daniels returned to the school with a full team. Titan was with them. They re-entered room 207, which had been closed off since the first discovery. The boards had been removed, and the floor still showed the spot where the box had been found. Titan paced the classroom, nose low. Then he stopped again, this time near the teacher's desk. He barked once, then began pawing at a floor vent. Daniels walked over and unscrewed the vent cover. Behind it was a narrow shaft, too small for a person, but large enough for a bundle. Inside, Wrapped in plastic was a collection of old files, notebooks, and photos. They were singed but mostly intact. Names, faces, disciplinary reports, all connected to one name, Principal Everett Bennett. Daniels stared at the photos. Most were ordinary, classroom events, student activities, but one stood out. It was black and white, blurry, a child, possibly 8 or 9, sitting in a dark room, looking terrified. Behind him, a shadowed figure stood in the doorway. Daniels turned to Officer Bradley. That room downstairs? It was used. More than once. Bradley said nothing. Titan sat at attention, eyes fixed on the open vent, as if waiting for justice to crawl out of the dark. Detective Daniels sat alone in the evidence room, the black and white photo spread in front of him. The child's terrified expression had etched itself into his mind. He had looked at thousands of photos in his career, but this one felt different, personal, violated. The grainy figure in the background was barely visible, but its posture, the tilt of the head, the way the hands were folded at the waist, it screamed familiarity. Daniels leaned closer. The figure was wearing a tie, thin, striped, a fashion detail that pointed directly to the 1970s. He picked up the evidence log and circled a name with his pen. Everett Bennett, principal of Cedar Valley Elementary from 1969 to 1983. Retired quietly. No disciplinary history. Highly respected. Or so the record said. But the hidden documents told a different story. One folder found in the vent included a series of incident reports that had never been entered into the district database. Daniels skimmed through the papers again. Each described a student complaining of strange noises from beneath the classroom. At least 3 reported physical discomfort during class. Dizziness, nausea, feelings of being watched. All 3 reports were signed and sealed. By Everett Bennett. Daniels flipped to the back of the folder and found a transfer request from Judith Graves, dated March 15, 1975, 6 days before she vanished. No one had ever seen this document before. He picked up his phone and dialed Officer Bradley. "Get Titan ready," he said. "We're paying a visit to a retirement community." Shady Pines Senior Living was clean, quiet, and smelled like lemon disinfectant. The receptionist smiled when Daniels asked for Everett Bennett. "He doesn't get many visitors," she said. "He mostly keeps to himself." They were led to a second-floor room with a balcony. Bennett was sitting outside in a wheelchair wrapped in a thick plaid blanket. His hair was white and thin, but his eyes were sharp. He turned as Daniels approached. "Detective," Bennett said before Daniels had even introduced himself. "I was wondering when someone would come." Daniels didn't smile. "We found a room beneath Cedar Valley." Bennett blinked. "It took you long enough." Bradley stepped forward. "So you knew." "I knew parts," Bennett said softly. "But no one would believe it. And then people stopped asking questions." Daniels placed a sealed evidence bag on the table. Inside was the photo. "Is this you?" Bennett stared at it for a long time. "That photo was never supposed to exist." "Then explain it." The old man took a slow breath. "In 1974, we found out that the old building plans included a maintenance tunnel under room 207. Robert Marks was the only one who still had access. He said he used it to move supplies quietly, but that was a lie." He looked up. He was hiding. "Something down there." "What was it?" Daniels asked. "I don't know exactly. I only know Judith came to me with concerns. She had seen children escorted into the room below by someone who wasn't supposed to be there. She didn't say who, just that it didn't feel right." "Why didn't you report it?" "I tried," Bennett whispered. "I called the district. They told me to let it go, that they would handle it internally." Daniels narrowed his eyes. "So you let her disappear?" Bennett looked away. "I thought she had run off. That's what they told me. I didn't know about the tape, or the box, or that poor child." Titan let out a low whine, ears forward. Daniels leaned in. "You knew enough to ask more questions, and you didn't." There was silence. Finally, Bennett said, Then make sure someone does now. Back at the precinct, Daniels ordered a full scan of the district's off-site storage. He wanted everything: personnel files, maintenance logs, custodial schedules, from 1969 through 1985. The request yielded 2 crates of water-damaged paper. Most of it was useless. But tucked inside a payroll folder was something that made Daniels sit up. A canceled check, dated April 3rd, 1975, payable to E. Carson. Not a teacher, not staff. He flipped the check over. In shaky cursive was a note: "For security assistance. Discretion appreciated." Bradley raised an eyebrow when he saw it. Security for what? Schools don't hire off-the-record security. Daniels checked the district vendor log. No one named E. Carson had ever been on file. They had been paid in cash. It was a cover. That night, Daniels received a call from the lab. We decrypted the flash drive. He drove to the lab in silence, thoughts swirling. Inside the flash drive was a single folder. It was labeled Alma. Confidential inside were audio files, dozens of them, labeled by date and voice print. Each was less than 5 minutes. Daniels clicked on one. A man's voice. "This is Carson. I've secured the basement. No one came down. The girl doesn't speak much. Keeps asking about a teacher, named Judith." Daniels clicked another. "The board is worried. They want this closed before spring break. Told me to handle it quietly." Then another. "There's a leak. Someone's been recording things. I think it's the literature teacher." Daniels closed the folder, heart racing. Whoever Alma was, she was not a place. She was a person, and she had been held under that school. The document said girl, the bones said child, the photo said fear, and the voices said cover-up. The next morning, Daniels stood once again inside room 207. Titan was beside him, still and alert. The floor had been pulled back, the old heating vent removed, the tunnel exposed. He looked down into the dark opening. This was no longer just about a teacher, or a missing student, or a strange smell under the floor. It was about every kid who had sat in this room, never knowing what was beneath their feet, and it was time to tell the truth, no matter who had tried to bury it. Detective Daniels stood at the edge of the old tunnel, eyes locked on the narrow dark passage that sloped downward beneath room 207. Titan stood beside him, motionless, his breath steady and low. The German shepherd had led them this far, into secrets buried deeper than anyone imagined. But now Daniels knew the case wasn't just about what had happened. It was about who. Alma. The name from the flash drive had haunted him since last night. Not a place. A person. A child. Possibly the same child whose remains had been found sealed beneath the school floor. Daniels adjusted his flashlight and stepped carefully into the passage. The walls were lined with cracked plaster and pipes that hissed softly from the old boiler room above. Behind him, Bradley followed in silence, his gun drawn just in case. They reached the sealed door at the end of the tunnel. Daniels had been here before. But this time, he noticed something new. Scratches. Dozens of them. Small, thin, desperate scratches along the inside of the frame. Some were deep. Some had dried red flecks still clinging to them, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. Titan growled softly. Bradley lowered his voice. "She was here." Daniels nodded and pushed open the door. The hidden room beyond had been cleaned out weeks ago, after the initial discovery. But now, with the new evidence, the forensic team had returned. Blue lights bathed the walls, revealing stains invisible to the naked eye. Shoe prints, handprints, even a partial message written in faded chalk near the far wall. It said one word. Help. A female forensics technician stepped forward. "Sir, we just finished matching the partial DNA from the bones found in the concrete chamber. We ran it against every old foster care record we could access." "And?" Daniels asked. She held out a printout. Her name was Alma Reyes. Born in 1966, ward of the state. Entered Cedar Valley in 1974 as part of a temporary placement program. She was supposed to be there for only 2 weeks. Then she disappeared. Daniels took the paper and stared at her photo. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 in the image. Short, dark hair, a chipped tooth, wide eyes like she was already afraid of the world. Bradley said quietly, "How does a child vanish from a school without anyone noticing?" Daniels folded the paper, because they made sure no one was looking. That evening, Daniels met with District Superintendent Valerie Cruz. She was newer to the position, brought in just 2 years earlier to clean up what the board called a culture of administrative neglect. Now she sat across from Daniels with a hard expression. "You're telling me that for decades Cedar Valley sat on top of an unreported crime scene?" she asked. "I'm telling you that someone made sure it stayed buried." Daniels placed the printouts, photographs, and forensic findings on her desk. Alma Reyes never left the building. Her records were altered. Her name was removed from the transfer list. The only reason we even know she existed is because of a single name left behind in a folder and the scent trail of a canine. Valerie flipped through the documents, her face growing pale. And the people responsible? Some are dead, some retired, and some still have influence in this district. She looked up. "Are you saying this cover-up goes all the way to the school board?" Daniels didn't answer, but the silence said enough. By morning, Daniels had issued a request for a public hearing. The evidence was too large to suppress, and too dangerous to be handled behind closed doors. News vans lined up outside the station. Headlines hit the morning broadcasts. Cedar Valley cover-up, child remains found beneath school. Alma Reyes case, reopened after 50 years. Daniels stood before the cameras, delivering the press statement. "We now believe that Alma Reyes, a foster child in the 1970s, was hidden and later killed beneath Cedar Valley Elementary. The investigation indicates a pattern of administrative negligence and possibly intentional misconduct. We will not rest until every responsible party is identified and held accountable." Titan sat at his side, silent and strong, the very image of loyalty. When Daniels returned inside, Bradley was waiting. "We got a call from Alma's only known relative, a cousin. She lives in Oregon. She wants to come identify the items." "Bring her in," Daniel said. "It's time someone spoke for Alma." 2 days later, Maria Salgado stepped into the station with trembling hands. She was in her late 50s now, but her eyes lit up when she saw the old photo of Alma. "That's her," she whispered. "She lived with us for 1 summer. We were just kids, then she was placed in the program and never came back." Daniels showed her the doll, melted, half gone, but the name stitched into the fabric was still legible. "Rosie," Maria said, covering her mouth. "That was Alma's favorite." She turned to Daniels, eyes full of grief. "She wasn't just a file. She was a real little girl. She loved singing. She was afraid of the dark, and she always held that doll when she felt alone." Daniels looked down at the evidence box. "She's not forgotten anymore." At the school, a memorial was placed outside room 207. A small plaque with her, was a framed photo of Titan, and a line etched in stone. "For Alma Reyes, you were seen. You were heard. You are home." On the day of the memorial, students, parents, and staff gathered in silence. No speeches, no press, just a moment. And Titan sat beneath the plaque, ears back, tail curled, eyes watching the place where the truth finally surfaced. The room where the dog refused to stop digging, the classroom where the past refused to stay buried, and the school that could never pretend again. 3 weeks had passed since Alma's name returned to the world. The media had moved on. Other headlines filled the screens. But inside Cedar Valley Elementary, room 207 would never be the same. Neither would Detective Daniels. He sat quietly on a bench beneath the old oak tree outside the school. Next to him, Titan rested, his thick coat glistening under the morning sun. Children were playing in the distance again. Laughter returned, slowly, carefully. Daniels looked at the plaque one more time. The wind blew softly, stirring the yellow, ribbons tied around the fence. Alma's story was no longer hidden in darkness. She had been remembered. He thought of the girl in the photo, The broken doll, the faint scratches on the door, and the voice on the tape begging to be believed. She had no grave for nearly 50 years, but now she had a name etched in stone, and a legacy carried by a dog who refused to stop barking. The final hearing took place inside the city courthouse. Not many seats were filled. Just a handful of survivors, some press, and school officials, the new ones mostly. Detective Daniels stepped forward when called. He read from the full report. Alma Reyes was unlawfully confined beneath Cedar Valley Elementary in 1975. She was never reported missing by the school. The only record of her disappearance came from a failed file transfer and a name scratched into a maintenance log. Her remains were discovered after a K-9 officer, Titan, alerted his handler during a classroom visit. The room was silent. The investigation revealed that multiple individuals either ignored, altered, or buried records tied to her case. One teacher, Judith Graves, tried to expose the truth. She disappeared a week later and was never found. We now believe she was silenced to protect those responsible. He paused. Thanks to Titan and the audio files preserved on a flash drive, we were able to recover names, locations, and missing documents that led to the truth. This case is not just about the past. It is about listening when no one else will. About paying attention to what others dismiss. The judge nodded. Let it be known, she said, that the name Alma Reyes will never again be erased. Outside, reporters swarmed as Daniels and Bradley exited the courthouse. But Daniels didn't stop for the cameras. He crouched next to Titan and whispered, "We did it." The dog nuzzled his hand and wagged his tail once. Just once. Later that week, the Cedar Valley School Board approved the renaming of Room 207. It would no longer be just another classroom. It would become the Alma Reyes Learning Center, a space dedicated to child advocacy and safety training for teachers, staff, and students. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Maria Salgado stood holding Alma's old doll, Rosie. Her hands trembled as she spoke. Alma had no voice for 50 years. Now she speaks through every child who learns in this room. She reminds us that silence can be broken, and that even the forgotten can be found. Titan barked once, soft and sure. On the last day of school, as the halls echoed with backpacks zipping and locker doors slamming, Daniels walked through one, last time. He paused in the center of room 207. The boards had been repaired, new floors installed. Sunlight poured through the windows, but the air held something more now. Peace. Redemption. Memory. Bradley stepped in with Titan. One last check? Daniels nodded. Titan sniffed along the wall, paused at the far corner, then turned in a slow circle and sat down calmly. Bradley smiled. Looks like we're clear. Daniels knelt beside the dog. You listened when no one else did. Titan licked his hand gently. 2 months later, Daniels received a letter. It was from a teacher in another district. She had heard about Titan in room 207. She had a student who refused to speak. A foster child. Quiet. Withdrawn. But when the student met a visiting K-9 unit, she spoke for the first time in months. Her words, "I feel safe now." Daniels folded the letter and stared out the window of his office. It was never about just one child. It never would be again. Thank you for following Alma's story and for honoring the truth that took decades to surface. If a dog hadn't spoken, through his bark, would the truth have ever come out? What do you believe is stronger, silence or the courage to break it? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.